Welcome back, viewers. To start off with a side note, I think this is the first show I'll be reviewing that's come out after 2010. I'm so bad about getting around to the things on my to-watch list. Usually by the time I do watch them, they're not new anymore. But anyway, on to the review. I'm adding the spoiler warning in here, though I really don't plan on going into too many specifics. I think I'm pleased with the way this review is, with just the general oversights. But in case you don't want to take a chance on learning anything that you'd rather watch yourself, here's the spoiler warning. Beware. Gargantia takes place in the distant future. I guess post-apocalyptic is an accurate description, but unlike most stories with this type of setting, they don't really focus on why life changed from the way it is today. Like they aren't aware of any human-made disaster that everyone is consciously trying not to repeat. There's no one who can remember life being any different from the way it is now. Our main protagonist is a boy named Leto, who has spent his entire life in space as a trained soldier in the Galactic Alliance Army. Their sole purpose is to defeat the Hideyaos, a race of squid-like aliens who have been threatening humankind for as long as anyone can remember. It's briefly mentioned that once people have served for a certain amount of time, they earn the right to retire and live on the only life-sustaining planet left, or so they think. Because what kind of story would it be if everything didn't go spectacularly wrong? During his final mission for the army, Leto is thrown off course and ends up stranded on a planet he didn't know existed. And this planet is Earth, the fabled land of humanity's origin, or rather, the new Earth. All those years ago, our planet underwent an extreme ice age. Eventually, the planet thawed, but now the entire thing is covered by water. The inhabitants can hardly imagine the concept of land. They live on fleets of interlocking ships, and the one Leto lands on is called Gargantia. Right off the bat, there were a lot of things I really liked about this show. Leto has been completely numbed to the life of a soldier. All he really knows how to do is take orders, so it was interesting to see him struggle to comprehend the idea of living for the sake of individual happiness and collective prosperity. It was funny to see that this new society grew to value a lot of the same things that the old one does, but mostly I like that they didn't have to sacrifice logic in order to tell their story. For example, it only made sense that Leto wouldn't speak the same language as the natives of this new Earth. Even though he had his AI suit to translate for him, we got to watch Leto struggle to learn the language so he could communicate on his own. I'm still not sure if they were speaking an actual language in the scenes where the characters couldn't understand each other, but I'm going to assume it was all made up, so kudos to the voice actors for making that gibberish sound believable. In general, I really liked what they did with Leto's character. I mentioned in one of my earliest reviews that it's a fairly common setup to have the main character plagued with amnesia of some kind. It's the easiest way to tell the viewers what's going on when the main character doesn't know either, without making all the exposition seem pointless. It's certainly preferable to the way episode 1 of this show opened, with rapid-fire narration detailing out how space life worked. Granted, all the most important points were rehashed over and over again later, but if I had to fault this show for anything, it would be the opening. It was hard to follow, and thus hard to get engaged in the story right away. They handled the explanation of Gargantia much better. Which I guess indirectly it described space life a little better for us. Leto had to get used to things like individual jobs and the idea of doctors, because where he comes from, if a person isn't strong enough to serve in the army, then they're not allowed to live. Which kind of brings me to another main character stereotype. More often than not, main characters are goofy, clumsy, or over-emotional, sometimes for no purpose other than comic relief. Even though he was totally lost in a foreign place where he didn't speak the language or understand the customs, Leto never lost his cool or stopped looking for the most logical course of action. It was a refreshing change, and his usually stoic personality made it all the more effective later on, when he started making discoveries that challenged everything he'd been taught, and his actions did begin to be ruled by his emotions. But I think my favorite thing about this show was how they handled the concept of right and wrong. When Leto crash-landed on Gargantia, he was of the state of mind that things were very black and white. You followed orders and that was that. Humankind was all united in one army fighting the Hideyaos. There wasn't this concept of personal agendas and trying to coexist peacefully with other species. One of the first lessons Leto learns is why it's okay to kill animals for food, but it's the worst offense to take a human life. It offset the villains of this show perfectly, and by that I mean that it can be argued that there aren't any, which is funny because there's certainly a lot of conflict in this show. One of the biggest themes in Gargantia is pushing that coexistence is possible, something Leto really struggles to come to terms with, and there was rarely a slow moment in this show. Even the episodes that would be the equivalent of the beach episode or the culture festival holiday episode in other anime where things are a little more relaxed, still manage to escape the filler zone here by highlighting these conflicts. There are other fleets and pirates and, as I said, people on Gargantia who have their own personal agendas and are willing to overlook the well-being of everyone else in order to accomplish their own goals. We get to see how a change of leadership is handled, and there's the question of how the whale squids, or Earth Hideyaos, should be dealt with. The biggest conflict near the end revolves around how the people of this new Earth would prefer to live versus the way the Galactic Army thinks human society should be managed, and most of the characters who normally would be considered villains end up fighting on the side of the heroes in the last battle. I like that there was so much gray area here. In the end, it's possible to justify everyone's actions in one way or another. As is true of most shows that have come out within the past few years, Gargantia has a nice, shiny animation style. This goes for the character designs too, but it was most impressive in the backgrounds. The colors were bright and beautiful, perfect for the oceanic landscape that made up this new Earth. When they showed the Gargantia fleet as a whole, it kind of reminded me of the scene in Kiki's delivery service when she first arrives at the town. In terms of other recommendations, Gargantia as a whole reminded me kind of a cross between Black Lagoon and Eden of the East with a futuristic spin on it. Which isn't usually my thing, and I have to say, I'm glad I took a chance on this show. It hasn't done much to change my opinion on space-themed, future-themed, or mecha shows, but interesting characters, or more accurately in this case, interesting underlying themes, have always had the power to make me overlook something I'm not usually interested in. Though both music and animation-wise I prefer the opening to the ending, I did like both, and the music throughout the entire show was fitting. As I mentioned, I did watch this one in English. I didn't feel like there were any voice performances that weren't up to par, but I did really like Leto's voice. He actually reminded me a little of Micah Solusod, who I know best as Soul from Soul Eater. But I was actually more impressed when I looked him up later and found that Alan Lee has done very little voice work so far. I'm pretty sure Gargantia is his first anime, so to be able to pull off a main character so early into his voice acting career is impressive to me. All in all, Gargantia offered a good dub, solid animation for more than one type of scene, an interesting plot, and most importantly to me, a fascinating analysis of society and humanity in general. Even if it's not the type of story that would typically catch your eye, I'd suggest giving this one a try. Thank you for watching.